Today we're focusing on the SDGs more broadly and the EU as a humanitarian actor. We're also going to be looking at the role of the Development Committee and how the EU funds humanitarian work by looking at the ECHO funding of Concerns work in Syria. We have three excellent speakers today. We have Concerns Country Director for Syria and Iraq, Farial Minnis. We have Barry Andrews, MEP for Dublin, and we also have Jeffrey Moxom, who's the coordinator of the SDG Watch, and he is going to discuss the SDGs on a more broad level. So our first speaker today is Farial. Thank you so much for being with us. Farial has more than 22 years experience of working for INGOs, and she's worked at many levels. She is our country director for Syria and Iraq. Farial has worked on projects funded by ECHO, the EU, USAID, DFID, Start Fund, WFP, UNHCR, UNICEF, UNDP, and OCHA. She has successfully managed development and emergency response programs and rights-based advocacy programs in health, education, child protection, and women empowerment. She has extensive experience in direct implementation, as well as working with other partner organizations. We are thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for making the time. Farial, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be presenting Concerns work in Syria, because I just feel Syria is a forgotten country, particularly with all the issues that come all over the world. And people talk about Syria and then it's forgotten, and then until somebody puts some kind of highlight. So I'm going to focus on Concerns work, and particularly the projects. My highlight will be the projects that are funded by the EU. So next. So a little bit of background on why we're here. So 2024 marks the 13th year of the Syrian civil war that started in 2011, stemming from the broader Arab Spring movements involving various state and non-state actors. This crisis continues to inflict profound humanitarian suffering and regional instability. This picture here is of the non-formal settlements, and there are formal camps, but Concern is not really working. We're not focusing there because there are some other agencies. So we work in very kind of scattered locations. In terms of context, approximately about 16.7 million people require humanitarian assistance to access food, clean water, shelter, and hygiene facilities. That is more than 85% of the population. These figures are for whole of Syria, and to let you know that the program that I'm talking about is more about the northeast of Syria. Because of the war, in a way, the country is split into three, which is the GOS, which is the government of Syria area, and then you have the northeast Syria, we usually call it NES, and then you have the northwest of Syria. So northwest of Syria is accessed through Turkey, and northeast of Syria is accessed through northern Iraq, where we are at the moment. Over 80% of Syrians now live below the international poverty line. Prior to the start of the conflict in 2011, this figure of population under the poverty line was only 10%. There is increased frequency and scale of shocks such as cholera, earthquake, flooding, insecurity, border closures, and extreme inflation in the last couple of years. Climate change is impacting social relations, food systems, desertation and water scarcity. Decreasing in funding, which is a huge issue. Despite record need, people required some form of humanitarian assistance in Syria, which went from 14.6 million in 2002 to 15.3 million in 2003 and to 16.7 million in 2024. And despite that, because of the different problems in the world and different conflicts, the humanitarian funding is continuously decreasing, which is a huge, it's very alarming, and it's quite worrying for the coming years. Next, please. So, I mean, if you can focus on the map here with me, the yellow part is the northeast of Syria, which I already mentioned, and this is where concern is located. So these little homes that you see, those areas are where concern is present. So pretty much concern is present all over the northeast of Syria, and saying that concern started with this response very early on. So concern is quite a big actor. At the moment, our portfolio is around over 18 million a year with different donors. In the past, it has reached 38 to 40 million a year as well. The only corridor to this area is the northern Iraq, and you can see something here on your left, which is the Hook office. So it's the Semelka/Fish Khabur border crossing, and that's the only border crossing that we can use at the moment. So what we're doing in Syria is that we're responding to the crisis in Syria since 2013. Our assistance is multi-sectoral and integrated life-saving emergency assistance in line with ECHO's mandate. We focus on education, protection, WASH, food security, shelter and settlements, and disaster risk reduction. We're very active in the coordination mechanisms. The UN is not present in the northeast of Syria, so we don't have the cluster system, so we call them the working groups. So we're active in cash, WASH, education, food security and livelihoods, protection, and advocacy working groups. These working groups are usually kind of managed or run by the NES forum, which is an NGO-led forum. So no UN interference. It's a very unique way of coordination. Most people won't have that kind of exposure. The areas that we work in, as I said, you can look in the map, but we're in Ain al-Arab, Aleppo, Al-Raqqa, and Deir ez-Zor. We have 7 bases, out of which 5 are active operational bases, which we call our offices. Our objective is to intervene in hard-to-reach areas that are difficult to access and with low presence of humanitarian actors. Our main focus is on the out-of-camp populations, as I mentioned earlier. Next, please. I'm going to just focus on our intervention on our sectors individually. So, and these are mostly ECHO-funded interventions. So we have education in emergencies, under which we do literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning for out-of-school children. In-school support for vulnerable children at risk of dropping out. So we kind of give them more kind of educational support, so they kind of maintain to go to school. Caregiver sessions to support home learning environments, that is to strengthen the home environment for the children. School rehabilitation for sustainable learning spaces. There are many schools that were damaged by during the conflict, so we are supporting the rehabilitation of those schools. Support for children's reintegration into the formal education, and training support for non-formal education instructors. So one of the focuses that out of school rate for children has increased from 22% and 16% in 2 governors of Northeast Syria in 2023 to 48 and 38% respectively in 2024. And the reason for this is mainly the economic crisis going on in Syria, and particularly in northeast Syria. Parents are pulling out their children out of school so the children can help them more with their income. It could be farmland support, working on farmland, doing small tasks, or even begging. Concern works in informal settlements and in disadvantaged areas with a high population of displaced persons. So I'm not going to go into the connection to SDGs. It's there. You can look into it. So there's quite a wide range of connection to the SDGs under different areas. Next, please. Protection. Protection is quite a unique intervention for concern as an organization. In the Middle East, we're quite strong for on protection activities. So what we do in protection is we provide community-based psychosocial support services for vulnerable children and youth. We do positive parenting program with caregivers, and case management activities are provided with complementary funding of other donors. So this case management is not supported by ECHO, but other donors, but they have to be done together. Otherwise, if you don't do case management, we can't achieve the first two interventions. So concern worldwide operation areas severity is according to the scoring in terms of child protection in 2023 is between severe and catastrophic. Next, please. WASH. So WASH is the water, like hygiene and water and shelter kind of hygiene promotion. So in water infrastructure rehabilitation for safe and sufficient potable water, we are doing installation of sanitation facilities and waste management systems, capacity building for water safety and hygiene promotion, vector control measures to prevent disease spread, and we were quite big during the cholera outbreak about 1.5 years ago. Provision of water trucking and solid waste management. There are areas, the first picture that you looked at, there are no wash facilities, there are no kind of water points. So we are doing huge kind of intervention for water trucking because the government does not want us to dig wells or have a sustainable water point. So we are still living on water trucking. The concern worldwide is now reaching the furthest to reach areas of Deir ez-Zor. There's the area which is on the right at the east of the northeast of Syria, Deir ez-Zor. It's called Hajin. There's no other international organization that has reached that area. We are the first ones, and there's huge need, but of course, due to very high security issues, only local or national staff can reach those areas. International staff have not been able to get to those areas. Concern Worldwide is the main WASH actor in many of the areas where we intervene, and Concern is piloting menstrual hygiene health in hygiene promotion campaign. Next, please. Food security and livelihood. So provision of MPCA, which is the multi-purpose cash assistance program to vulnerable households to meet their basic needs. And then we're providing provision of small business grants, vocational trainings, and coaching and mentoring. So these two interventions are interlinked. Those households that are supported with MPCA, we kind of we have a selection criteria, and from those, we provide support to some families to open up some small business grants. There's a whole process of selection. There is training, and then people are submitting proposals out of which we select the best suited, and we provide grants to those beneficiaries. Concern Worldwide primarily focuses on out-of-camp response, again, for the food security in informal settlements in severely food insecure districts. Can we go back still, yeah? Concern Worldwide is the only actor in a number of high-priority districts and relies on nutrition-sensitive household targeting approach. These households are also supported through short-term livelihood support as a graduation approach, which I already mentioned. And we are also mainstreamed financial literacy awareness into the cash distribution. Next, please. Shelter and settlements. We're providing cash for winter assistance to vulnerable IDP households and rehabilitation of unfinished or partially damaged buildings for shelter assistance. And then we're working under disaster risk reduction, which is provision of emergency multipurpose cash assistance, MPCA, to IDPs in the aftermath of a shock, for example, the earthquake last year. Next, please. So here you can see our concerns impact in 2023 and the number of beneficiaries that we reached. So the direct beneficiaries together, we worked in different sectors, was 492,622. And then there's the breakdown of the segregation between men and women. Next, please. So our impact, which is kind of through the EU funds, is the number of beneficiaries, which 579,644 beneficiaries assisted through latest ECHO grant funded program. This is 2022-2023 ECHO grant. 2,937 individuals reached through non-formal education, which is the NFE activities. 78% successfully transitioned into formal education system. That is, like, the children went back to school. 7,800 students benefiting from school rehabilitation and WASH facilities. And our interventions have ensured access to critical services to over 500,000 beneficiaries through WASH interventions. This provided rapid response to outbreaks of waterborne diseases, including acute watery diarrhea and cholera. Concern provided targeted assistance to vulnerable households through MPCA, benefiting more than 7,700 individuals. This was complemented by shelter rehabilitation distribution of non-food items, winterization assistance, benefiting more than 57,000 beneficiaries. The disaster risk component implemented by both Concern and another organization, PIN, ensured readiness to sudden flood crisis in NES, to emergency MPC assistance, reaching to more than 8,000 individuals. Next, please. So ways forward, we want to be as local as possible, as international as necessary. So we're focusing on localization. We're thinking of we are planning and developing work through partners, also more emphasis on national staff. We're looking into strengthen diversity and inclusion focus through disability inclusion barrier and enabler assessment. Use of education technology and mobile teams to increase reach, quality and speed of response. We still want to continue to be working into the hard to access areas through local partners, sustainability, capacity building and resilience in WASH, support the local structures for them to be able to resist future crises and take care of rehabilitated infrastructures. Reach the farthest areas where no one is able to support to ensure no one gets left behind. That's it from myself. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions.
That's great, Farial. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone in the chat has or online has any questions for Farial. A quiet crowd. Well, thank you so much, Farial, for that. I think it's really important to show that the work that Concern is doing in Syria and that we're there because of EU funding. And it's good to spotlight the impact it's having on beneficiaries and the impact it's having as well on plans forward for localization. So if no one has any other questions, not seeing anything in the chat, okay. Well, thank you very much, Farrell. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know you're many hours ahead of us here in Dublin, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll stay on for a bit and then I'll leave. Thank you very much.
That would be great. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, our next speaker we have lined up is Barry Andrews. Barry Andrews has come to us, thank you very much, with a wealth of experience. Barry is one of Dublin's MEPs representing Fianna Fáil and the Renew Group in the European Parliament. He's a full member of the Development Committee as well as the International Trade Committee, and was also the lead negotiator, or one of the lead negotiators on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and is a substitute on the FEM Committee, which is the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. Previously, on top of those amazing experiences, Barry was a TD. He was also a Minister for Children and CEO of GOAL and a former director of the Institute of International and European Affairs. Barry, we're thrilled you're here. Thank you so much. We've got like 80, 70 odd days left to the election. So we'll pass over to you. And if you want to tell us a bit about your work and the work of the Development Committee and anything else looking ahead at the next mandate as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for the invitation. 73 days to be precise. Not that I'm counting. First of all, delighted to speak with Concerned staff with whom I've worked, of course, for many occasions in different parts of the world. I'm delighted to hear from Farial about your activities in Syria. Last week, I was at a little an event outside the Russian embassy protesting their involvement in the ongoing war in Syria. And, you know, there were less than 10 people there. It's 13 years, it was marking 13 years of the war. And unfortunately, it's really become quite a forgotten crisis. So it's good that you're highlighting the excellent work that you're doing there. So let me talk a little bit, start about the SDGs. So for my part, I decided to set up an organization in the European Parliament called the SDG Alliance. And the SDG Alliance consists of about 30 MEPs from across the political spectrum. And I'm the chair of the SDG Alliance, and we are MEPs who are dedicated to the implementation of the SDGs and highlighting the importance of the SDGs at the European level. So what that means in practice, two things. First of all, three things. First of all, we wanted to restore an SDG report onto the annual agenda of the European Parliament, which we have done successfully. We've had 2 resolutions last year and the year before. Secondly, we wanted to convert the alliance to an intergroup, which would mean we'd get actual staff and budget, and you can't do that except after an election. So I'm hoping, if I do get elected, to convert the SDG Alliance into an intergroup and therefore raise its profile. The third thing we do as members, we try to highlight the SDG aspect of the work that we're doing. And for my part, I work in the Trade Committee, as Laura pointed out. So it won't surprise anybody in this call that the SDGs have a lot to do with trade, particularly in the area of responsible production and responsible consumption, but also lots of other areas. And currently I'm working on a file that's almost complete. We have one more vote in about 4 weeks' time, which is the mouthful that Laura struggled with and everybody struggles with, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So CS3D for short. And what that is requiring companies to do is to X-ray their supply chain to make sure that what they're doing isn't causing human rights abuses and isn't contributing to environmental damage. So hence, the SDG 12 on responsible consumption and responsible production, putting the pressure on companies to do the right thing. Now, a lot of them are already doing the right thing. A lot of them are volunteering according to the UN guidelines on responsible business and human rights. That's already happening. There are other pieces of legislation that are contributing to this. For example, the Deforestation Directive. For example, the batteries regulation, which require companies that are involved in those industries to carry out due diligence to make sure they're not contributing to human rights abuses or environmental degradation. So the new directive, well, what's it going to do? In its current form, it's much less ambitious than when we produced a resolution on it in the Parliament many years ago. We launched the Titanic. It's now a small yacht, essentially. So there are only a small number of companies that fall within its scope. So in particular, any company with more than 1,000 employees and more than 450 million euro in turnover. So in Ireland, that's less than 40 companies, maybe just 30 companies. And across the European Union, I think I saw a figure for 4,000 companies. So it's really tiny. And as I mentioned, most of those companies are doing it anyway. Or if they're not doing it anyway, they're caught, they're not doing it voluntarily, they're caught by the scope of other directives. So it's a rather bleak picture. But I'm going to vote for it when it comes before the Parliament in April, because at least we have something to build on. And hopefully in the following mandate, as we see how unimpactful it actually is, and continuing abuses in supply chains leading to environmental damage, when those are reported, and they will be reported, we may come to this with a slightly more ambitious agenda. And let me just finish on the CSR bit. So a lot of companies will say, well, we have these third-party companies that carry out ethical trading audits. And that is true. But how do you carry out an ethical trading audit in an autocratic country? And bearing in mind, most countries are autocratic, not a minority, but the majority of countries are autocratic to some extent or another. How easy is it to go to a factory spontaneously and unannounced, and as let's say a Chinese national, for example, to report that there are human rights abuses? How likely is it that when you ask an employee, are you being treated fairly? Are there any human rights issues, which is how an ethical trading audit is carried out, that they're actually going to put their hand up and make a complaint about it? It's very easy to carry out these kind of audits in Europe, where you're asking people if they're getting their labor rights, whether they're getting paid properly, whether they're getting holidays. That's easy to do, but it's almost impossible in some of the more remote supply chains. So in summary, this is the SDGs in action. Lots of people are very skeptical about the SDGs, but for me, it's a kind of conceptual framework that guides my approach to legislation. That legislation is now coming in, albeit very, very lacking in ambition. And also I'm worried about, in practice, how companies are going to satisfy the requirements of the legislation. Let me talk a little bit around the committee in the Parliament, the Development Committee. Being generous, I would describe it as a sleepy backwater. And I don't really mind being quoted on that, because it's very disappointing to see how little attention it receives, how lacking in ambition its leadership is, and how lacking in impact it is overall. I admit that there's no legislation that goes through DEVA, unlike with, say, the Econ Committee, the Environment Committee, the Single Market Committee. They have huge legislative files on digital single markets, on artificial intelligence, on green claims, nature restoration. In DEVA, we don't have any big legislative purpose whatsoever. We don't pass laws. So, but we do have two commissioners that we keep an eye on. One is Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, and the other is the Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid, which is Mr. Lenarčič. So by that account alone, we should be very prominent. Also, in my opinion, foreign policy consists of the 3 Ds. One is defense, one is diplomacy, and one is development. There's a huge focus on defense right now in the European Union because there's a fear that NATO won't come to our aid. European diplomacy, it's not very good. If you go to most parts of the world, let's say, I spent a lot of time in Nigeria recently because I was election observer there. The embassy of France is present, the embassy of Germany, the embassy of Belgium, Spain, of Italy, and there's also a European diplomatic presence. And very rarely does the European diplomatic presence rival that of the individual member states. So European diplomacy is not is not taken very seriously. And then that leaves you with development. And as I said, I don't think we're taking development very seriously at the moment. We're really a little bit lost at the European level as to what we think development is for. There are specific provisions in the treaties of the European Union that require it to be primary purposes for the eradication of poverty. That allows that there might be other purposes, but the primary focus on poverty, I think, has been lost, broadly speaking. So in Ireland, the 3 Ds are in reverse to Europe. We don't really have any interest in defense. It seems our diplomacy is outstanding and way out of proportion to our size as a country. And we do take development policy very seriously. And we take a very principled approach to development policy. Let me just talk about the last few months as well. I want to talk a little bit around what's happened in Gaza, which has kind of upturned everything and has, Gaza has been bad for everything, whether it's international law, whether it's humanitarian aid, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's Europe's position across the world, and of course, Ukraine being a backdrop against which people compare a lot of these issues. So Gaza has really set us back from those points of view. And, it goes without saying, I've been very outspoken about I think the war crimes that have been committed by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza. But I'm really just talking a little bit around about the process and the European Union. So, we could talk about Gaza all day, of course, but I just want to talk about how it's impacting the European Union. So, the European Union claims to be based on values and rule of law. And yet what we have here is a situation where the rule of law has been suspended, it seems, or as I said in the parliament on one occasion, Israel's need has become a moral code all of itself, separate and distinct from international law. The UN system is also been fatally undermined, in my opinion, because the Security Council had been so weak until last Friday, when finally they, gripped by a crisis of conscience, finally admitted that a ceasefire is the only way to bring an end to all of this horror. And then we have the position of UNRWA, which has been also fatally undermined by essentially what you call character assassination, where the allegations about individual members of UNRWA have been made almost simultaneously with accusations regarding Israel's conduct of its offensive and the extent to which that offensive constitutes breaches of the Genocide Convention. All of these things are happening at the same time and are very damaging. And then finally, on humanitarian access, this is a principle that we all, we can judge. I think in Afghanistan, humanitarian access, I'm told, is very good. There are no real impediments. Obviously, the Taliban have caused significant difficulty for a lot of humanitarian donors, but once you're in there, it's possible to gain access. In Syria, in the northeast, where we've just been listening to concerns activities, I'm not really sure how good humanitarian access is. In the northwest, it's very much dogged by the lack of any cross-border resolution. So cross lines is all that's available to the UN system anyway. NGOs can continue to do cross-border, but humanitarian access is limited, but in Gaza, humanitarian access is, of course, a complete disaster, and it's very arbitrary, it's punitive. The obstacles that are put in the way are very deliberate, and the foreign minister of the European Union, Mr. Borrell, has stated that in his view, unequivocally, starvation is being used as a weapon of war. And I happened to join a small delegation of MEPs. We got to get down to the Rafah crossing just before Christmas, and you can see for yourself very obviously that there are very arbitrary obstacles being put in the way on that side of the crossing. And then on the other side, inside Gaza itself, the usual practice of deconfliction of humanitarian aid movements isn't permitted. There are constant roadblocks in the areas that are occupied by the Israeli Defense Forces. And we heard a phrase that I'd never heard before. And it was interesting to hear to Faryal explain, giving the exact number of beneficiaries reached by concern in northeast Syria, whereas in Gaza, they use a phrase which is spontaneous delivery, which is basically if you stop for too long at a crossing, all of the aid is spontaneously delivered because people just rip it off the trucks. They're so desperate at this stage, and we're even getting to the point now of airdrops and flotillas and all of the things that you think would not be possible in this day and age. So, when this is all over, it'll require a very serious rethink for these big questions about impunity and accountability for what's happened. So overall, the European Union is completely divided on all of this. There are those who think, who are very pro-Israel, want to support Israel and everything it's doing, particularly, asserting the right of Israel to self-defense. And then there are those who don't agree with that point of view, that's gone too far, and that we need a ceasefire in order to avert this humanitarian catastrophe that's happening day in, day out. Now, final point I will make, because this webinar is about the election. Almost nothing I've just been talking about has any significance to the forthcoming election. Possibly Gaza to some extent, but the SDGs will not be mentioned anywhere. The activities of the Development Committee are usually not reported on anywhere. The fact that I'm chair of the SDG Alliance has never been mentioned anywhere in the Irish media. There is no electoral upside to any of this activity whatsoever. So therefore, there's not much of an incentive if you're being very sort of mercantile about it. There's not much incentive to be very active in the area of international development for the reasons I pointed out. That just isn't a huge. There used to be much more of an appetite for these issues. But not at the moment. So you have to focus as a candidate on national issues. So the economy, housing in the case of Ireland, issues that really concern people from day to day, because they don't really consider European issues, and even if they did, development would be very low down. That's just the reality. So look, I hope this has been helpful in some way. I'm happy to take any questions if any of you have any questions or comments you'd like to make.
Thanks, Moya, Barry. That was really interesting, and thank you for being so honest about your experience as well. I think people will start putting something into the chat, but actually, if we can maybe just go back to the CS3D. Thank you for giving me the acronym, so it's not such a mouthful. That got quite close to agreement, I think, a few weeks ago. I think, from what I understood, there was consensus from the Parliament, from the Commission and the Council, and then at the last minute, a few member states just weren't on board. How did you, as one of the negotiators, kind of regain momentum to go back into negotiation and deal with that frustration? Because I'm sure you had maybe constituents and other organizations, INGOs and other people who were quite disappointed in the process.
Yeah, Laura, it basically, our involvement ended in December as the Parliament. We got an agreement at what's called a trilogue with the Council representing the member states back in December. And normally that's it. That's the end of the matter. It then becomes law once you've got that agreement to trilogue. But then it went into the Council, which is the member states, and they couldn't agree. They went back on the agreement that we've made with them. So that's what's been happening since December. The Belgian presidency of the council have been putting forward more and more compromises. The German government in particular have been a disgrace on this. They never raised any of the issues they're now raising when we were in trilogues. That would be the time to do it. We were all in the room, but obviously they wanted to kill the proposal. So when it left us in trilogues last December, the proposal was for companies with more than 500 employees and more than 250 million turnover. So now it's 1,000 employees and 450 million turnover. Financial services are excluded. So it's a very limited, very lacking in ambition. It's nothing like what people were hoping for. But as I said, I'm going to vote for it because it's better than nothing. And I think the next parliament is not going to be anywhere as progressive as this one, even if you might think that this is the progressive parliament, but the next one will you'll see it'll be a little bit different in its outcome. You think be a lot more far right elected. Even those elected for my party are likely to be more center right than center. So I think even the parties themselves might maintain their votes, but there'll be more shifting in the political spectrum. So it's better to get this on the statute book and get each of the members. So because it's a directive, CS3D, each of the member states then has to transpose it into their national law. So it doesn't become effective directly. You have to go and write it up as a national law in each of the 27 member states. So Ireland will now be having to get on with it once this gets onto the statute books on the EU side.
Great, thank you. I have loads more questions about myself, but there's questions flying in on the chat. We'll go to one of them. Have you a sense of what the main issues of concern are amongst younger voters for this election?
Yeah, well, I've met with lots of younger voters. They bring up lots of, the climate is the primary one on the international side, and the other, a lot of them raise Gaza with me. They're very upset about the way the European Union has presented itself on this issue. And housing is a big issue for young people, particularly cost of rent, and you can't really say, well, it's not really a European issue. This is one of the member state issues. This is a sort of an educational webinar, so it's not a political one. So just for the purposes of the people on this webinar, the European Union has certain powers given to it by the member states under the treaties. And that's what the European Union does. It doesn't do education, really. There's Erasmus and Horizon. It doesn't do health. It does bits of health, like the Centre for Disease Control, European Medicine Agency, things like that. But overall, those subjects are dealt with by national member states. And so housing doesn't fall into it, but it will be part of the debate coming up the European Parliament elections. It's unavoidable. So I think they're the three areas: climate, the issue around Gaza, and housing are the ones that have been brought up with me most regularly. And of course, young people are far more ambitious on all these things than people of my generation and older, who have there's sometimes the distance. Also, people bring up the question of the voting age. There are 5 European countries where 16 is the age of voting, and there's arguments for and against, but anyway, they're the main issues that I see.
Thank you. And then another question on politics and toxicity that's been taking quite a toll on Irish politicians lately. And there's also a view that it's discouraging people from running for elections and taking up office at every level. Have you found this is the case in Europe? And is there anything you think that would help tackle the issue?
Yeah, I think there is a toxicity there, and it's even got, particularly for female politicians. I was with one of our female ministers this morning, and she said she doesn't go anywhere by herself anymore, which is just extraordinary. Publicly, that Holly Cairns, the leader of the South Dems, closed her office in Cork because she couldn't guarantee her own personal safety. Some of you will know a famous UK MP called Jo Cox, who was murdered in 2015. An amazing woman I admired somewhat. I agreed with everything she said virtually. She's a Labour MP, but she was murdered, and some people say it's only a matter of time before somebody gets hurt. You got these little protests outside Leinster House, and they're sticking their phones in your face and being very aggressive. If you start campaigning out in the streets, it's not long before a bunch of people come along with their phones in your face. But I think it's worse for women. It's very, very worse online. What can we do about it? There's no silver bullet. It's a lot about the new legislation, Digital Services Act. It's a lot about media literacy. It's a lot about funding proper journalism. You know, there's no such thing as a citizen journalist. It's like saying there's a citizen surgeon. You know, journalism has a minimum professional threshold of ability and responsibility. So you can't just show up and be a journalist, because this is what's the problem is. It's been democratized. You could say it sounds very good, but it's been a disaster. Not only for authentic, reliable outlets, but also for democracy. I mean, democracy is in a very serious state, in my opinion, across Europe. I think we're in real trouble and very complacent about it. And good people aren't bothered to enter politics. I mean, if you have strong views on migration, for example, if you're very much a migrant activist for the rights of migrants, people are telling you, just don't say anything about migration. It's a disaster. So it's a really unfortunate situation that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, it is. It is quite worrying, isn't it? So many politicians, as you said, women politicians are really experiencing a big issue. Maybe moving to something maybe a bit more positive. What do you think has been the biggest success of this mandate, of this parliament? So maybe not something you yourself have worked on, or indeed it could be something you've worked on, but something that's really going to make the lives of people like positively different.
Yeah, I think you know, I was really impressed with Ursula von der Leyen until Gaza. I think she messed that up in a big way for reasons that are not we don't have time to go into. But so I think the Green Deal has been a huge success. You know, the European Union has led the legislative program, and it's all encompassing. To see what it is made up of is really extraordinary. Now, there's been a bit of backtracking in recent weeks under protests from farmers. And we can talk about that, but that I think has been a huge achievement. I think the COVID response internally in the European Union was very, very strong. We were able to get access to vaccines pro rata as an EU member state. Being a small country, if we were trying to compete in the open market for vaccines, we would have been hammered. We were able to get approvals of medicines through the European Medicines Agency. We also had the digital COVID certificate, which allowed travel and tourism to come back in. And then you had this incredible and not really well known Next Generation EU initiative. For the first time ever, the European Union was borrowing money and mutual debt agreed across all the member states. You know, that was completely transformative. That happened in America in the late 18th century. And it was the base on which federalism was able to work. And then I think the other, by the way, I'm not a federalist, but anyway, the other point I think was Ukraine, where incredible solidarity was shown towards the Ukrainian people through financial support, through temporary protection directive, through creating a pathway for membership to the European Union. So lots and lots of different ways I think we've done very well to help the people of Ukraine in the face of the Russian onslaught, which has been appalling. I was in Kyiv last April with a mine clearings NGO to see their work. So I think there have been really positive things. So European Union has reacted incredibly well to incredible crises over the last 4 years.
Great, thank you. Maybe one or two more questions before I let you go.
Sure, take your time.
There's another question that we have tons. I think we could be here for hours. There's been a move towards shrinking space for civil society, and this has a huge impact for young people, for INGOs and other organisations. Is this something that you think will continue into the next mandate?
Yes, I think anything that's bad in this mandate will be worse than the next one. So I think there's going to be a very different complexion to the European Parliament, the European Commission, and to the Council of Ministers, to the European Council, I should say. So I think the next mandate will be much less about progressive policies, much less about consultation, and much more about deregulation, about competitiveness, innovation, a very pro-business agenda, which is fine. I don't have a problem with pro-business, but there has to be, you know, a balancing regulatory environment, because business naturally will not go to. I think it's naive in the extreme to think that business will automatically do the right thing. I mean, businesses are designed to create shareholder value. That's their purpose. They're not there to help society. A lot of them do really nice philanthropy. They support impact investing. They have very good CSR programs. Some of them are very thoughtful. But ultimately, we need to have a balance between that, the instinct to create innovation, competitiveness, a pro-business environment with the social needs of a very changing population. And I'm not sure that's going to be really positive in the next mandate. Civil society's role is shrinking in because the ones that the people that really are harmed the most as democracy is incrementally degraded are people on the margins that are represented by civil society. So we are, I think, facing into a fairly bleak period in that regard. But that's why I think we need more progressive voices in the European Parliament, and that's why Europe matters, why these elections matter, and vote for me, is basically what I'm saying. I'm allowed to say that.
And on that note, we'll do one last question, even though we have loads more. But I'm
just going to let the dog out the door because she's going to start yapping. 1 second.
No worries.
Okay, off you go. Go on. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, that's fine. Just one last question. If people want to get involved with your re-election campaign, how should they get in touch with you, and what should they do?
Well, if they want to, it would be great to. There's so many different, and it is important to get involved politically. It's easy enough to be involved in a single issue, but politics is about balancing priorities from time to time, and it's a good way to understand the system, frankly. To understand what motivates politicians, civil servants, most of whom are really properly motivated. But from my own point of view, I have a website, barryandrews.ie, and there's contact emails at that. And we're always looking for people to help out on the doors. We're always looking for people to help out with, campaign events and also spreading the word and all that kind of thing. Sorry, I don't mean to turn this into a party political broadcast, but no, I'm very excited. 73 days to go. I'll be out and about. Look, hopefully we will have some discussions on development issues, and I'm really grateful to Concern for hosting this webinar, and delighted to speak to your supporters across Ireland.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. We really appreciate your time, and best of luck. And I think I'm going to talk about the Coalition 2030 SDG hustings, and I think you're speaking at on April 18th at the end of the call. So there'll be another chance to ask Barry more questions, are the ones that we didn't get to answer at that session in a couple of weeks. So thank you very much. Really Laura. Appreciate your time. Now I'll pass over to Victoria, who will introduce the next section. Cheers, Victoria.
Thanks, Laura. So next up, we have Jeffrey Moxom. Jeffrey works at the European Environmental Bureau as the SDG Watch Europe coordinator, covering topics such as sustainable development, ecological transition, and participatory democracy. He studied politics at the University of Leicester, holds an MA in Environment, Development and Policy from the University of Sussex. Prior to joining the EEB, Jeffrey worked as the research coordinator in the International Cooperative Movement. So next, I'm going to hand over to Jeffrey.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you very much for having me. And it's very nice to meet you all. And I guess today, I guess I can just give you a few insights on our work, basically, as SDG Watch Europe, and how we are operating as a coalition. It's really nice to also catch a part of Barry's presentation and have a little bit of the kind of like political landscape overview. I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on sort of how we as a coalition have engaged with how the EU is basically implementing the SDGs and how we're working on around that. But maybe we can get also a bit more into kind of what's happening around the EU elections as well. So I don't know if I can maybe just share my screen. And I've got a little PowerPoint. Is that okay?
Yeah, we're not seeing it. Oh yeah, it's coming up now, Jeffrey.
How's that working? Are you seeing like the whole?
No, I'm just seeing it as in a. Yeah,
now?
yeah. Now all the slides are up. Now it's working. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. That's great. So basically, what is SDG Watch Europe, and what do we do? What do we do in our coalition? So really, our objectives. I mean, we're operating at the EU level. We're a cross-sectoral civil society alliance of different NGOs, basically. Environmental NGOs, social NGOs, human rights organizations, education, health, other sectors. And basically, our goal is really to just try to hold the EU to account for its commitments on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have around 90 member organizations from across Europe. SDG Watch was founded in 2015, so sort of when the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced. I mean, they're coming up for nearly a decade old now next year. And so basically I coordinate the Secretariat, and I'm also based at the European Environmental Bureau, which is Europe's largest network of environmental citizens organizations. And EEB itself is also a founding member of SDG Watch. So yeah, I'll talk a bit about how we engage. I'll maybe talk, I mean, one of the kind of biggest things that EU has done, I'm not sure if Barry actually mentioned it last year, they published what's called an EU voluntary review of the SDGs. So I'll maybe talk a little bit about that and how we engage with that process, and sort of how we also working with other civil society as well. So let's say, yeah, we have, our coalition is run by a steering group. So, and that group kind of facilitates most of our work, and we have kind of ad hoc working groups, which our members kind of participate in regular meetings. And so basically our steering group is really functioning as our board, and that's where all the decisions are taken, and it's re-elected every 2 years. All our members are kind of eligible to participate in our steering group, and we meet every month in Brussels or online. Here you can see our annual general meeting in Brussels. This is our former steering group member, Julie Rosenkilde, coming from Denmark, and she's holding in her hands there a copy of the European Voluntary Review on SDGs. So what was that? Basically, it was the first time that the European Union decided to do a kind of EU-wide national voluntary review carried out by the European Commission on basically how far had the EU got in implementing the SDGs so far. And the main idea is that basically member states report to the United Nations every year at the high-level political forum in New York on their progress. So the EU deciding to do this was obviously a good step in the right direction. So it was kind of one of the main things that we would like to follow and basically contribute to as a coalition. Whether I think the EU did a good job on this is another discussion, because I mean we've also heard the idea about shrinking civic space and civil society participation, and I think one of the key areas for us, you know, was and one of the key demands that we had as a coalition was that the European Commission could set up really some structured platform or engagement basically for civil society organizations to have dialogue with the institutions on how they can implement the SDGs. So maybe provide, for example, alternative sources of data, maybe to bring a bit more of a critical perspective on how the EU is doing, and also that the EU can also kind of get out its bubble and talk to different actors and get like a different perspective on how they're doing. So like, how do we do that as a coalition? I mean, you know, we kind of, or maybe I'll stay on the first slide there. I mean, we set up like a task force within our network, and we bring together our members, and we basically develop position, and we produce basically some core recommendations and key messages on the European Voluntary Review. We participate at the European Council level, so there is a kind of working party on sustainable development and Agenda 2030. So we also participate there to share our work. We try to set up bilateral meetings with DG INPA, who do kind of international cooperation, or the Secretariat General of the European Commission, which is kind of a more strategic or kind of informal entry point to discuss with them. And the Secretariat General is kind of supporting Ursula von der Leyen, who is, I guess, sort of supposedly in charge of delivering the SDGs officially at European level. Although, if it hasn't been mentioned already so far, we are a long way behind meeting our targets collectively. I mean, the United Nations itself is saying that we may only fully achieve only 12% of the SDG targets, which is quite a startling number. And of course, the Secretary General himself has called for a sort of rescue plan for the SDGs. We also engage with the informal SDG Alliance in the Parliament that Barry Andrews is leading, and we often have also contributed to texts when the Parliament has put forward a kind of own initiative report there. And we also have the European Economic and Social Committee itself, which is sort of the house of European civil society at the EU institutional level. So we have really engaged with them because they kind of put together their own opinions and recommendations on how the EU is doing on the SDGs, which were then published in an annex in the document you see there on the picture. So I guess here is a little bit kind of SDG Watch also engages kind of at the international level in the multilateral framework processes that we have to follow up SDGs at the global level. So, for example, in March in Geneva, we participated in the regional forum on SDGs, basically to bring civil society's perspective into some of the discussions that were going on there. And then, of course, each July in New York at the HLPF, we tend to participate also there. So it's a good opportunity. And I think this year we have what's called the Summit of the Future, where they will be discussing several different themes around sustainable development. One of which I think links quite nicely to what Barry had mentioned on kind of UN Security Council reform. So kind of how can you transform global governance? How can we make the sort of multilateral arena more effective? Because what we're seeing right now is a very, very challenging geopolitical and kind of multilateral environment. Then I guess we do like a lot of work on kind of bringing together different civil society organizations and putting together kind of reports and very nice activities. So I've actually, I mean, in terms of what's happening with the European elections, which are coming up in June, we've just come off a kind of a civil society forum that we set up with Solidar and a few other key organizations. And the edition that we've just had this afternoon, and which will continue tomorrow morning, is on the EU elections and basically looking at each of the European political party groups' manifestos and trying to sort of analyze them and saying, okay, to what extent do they really put forward policies and commitments which will take us closer to the SDGs? To what extent do they mention the SDGs, Agenda 2030, looking at the European Green Deal, looking at other kind of flagship European environmental and social legislation, and yeah, seeing where they stand also for the kind of new mandate to see what that will look like. Yep. Spoiler alert, perhaps. Yeah. Already been said, I think, today, but yeah, it is looking likely that I think the kind of centre-right, far-right parties will gain in this election, and there may be yeah, it will be less progressive parliament, I think, than we have for the current mandate. But that's not stopping us in terms of basically putting forward our demands for a green and social deal, for more social justice, for more climate justice, for reducing inequalities. So this is all kind of a part of our work, bringing together civil society. I'll skip over this one. This is more kind of like bit of an overview on one of the projects that we have on kind of citizens' participation and deliberation. But to give you an example, you know, we one of the reports we produced just looked at kind of how the current European Green Deal has performed, and maybe what are some of the gaps, and what are some of the things that are missing. So, for example, if the European Union were to put forward another European Green Deal, European Green Deal 2.0, a kind of common pact for the future, what sort of things should they focus on? And we're kind of thinking, okay, we need a stronger social dimension to the Green Deal. We need a stronger international dimension to the Green Deal, because there are obviously a lot of kind of negative externalities in Europe's current policies, where we see that, you know, if you're looking at waste or trade, sustainable production and consumption, there's a lot of areas in which we can do a lot better. And also kind of this idea of looking at new economic models. So yeah, a cooperative economy, a social and solidarity economy, and how to link basically social and environmental policies together. So that's a little bit, I've spoken a little bit about the Civil Society Forum and what we've spoken about today. If you are interested, you can also join us tomorrow for the remainder of our session. SDG Watch Europe has also been really key in producing some very interesting reports on kind of, yeah, exposing a bit what's behind the facade of the EU. So here's one we did on SDG 10, which is called Falling Through the Cracks, so exposing inequalities in the EU and beyond. And so we launched that at the European Development Days, which is a very big conference for international development every year in Brussels, and also at the side event in New York at the HLPF. Sorry, bear with me. I've just got a small technical issue here. We did another report on, again, kind of what I've discussed here, sort of the negative externalities of Europe's policies. So this was a kind of spotlight report on sustainability in Europe, titled "Who's Paying the Bill?" So really looking at kind of, you know, what are the costs of Europe's policies? What are the hidden costs of Europe's policies? Because a lot of the time, I think when we look at how does the EU measure its progress on SDGs, or, you know, how does Eurostat make its official kind of reporting methodologies on the SDGs? And I think what we often see is those methodologies do matter. So, you know, what we count matters. And I think in terms of Europe's efforts to kind of decarbonize or to shift to a sort of a green and just transition, it will not be enough if we simply kind of look at that only internally for people living in Europe. But we also have to look at, you know, the whole value chain, the whole kind of, you know, the very kind of end of a product cycle, for example, or, you know, where we are storing our waste, or if we're exporting, you know, all of these questions. So we kind of unpack that in this report, and I think it was a very interesting one as well. Last year, we also published one looking, yeah, basically, how far is Europe from achieving the SDGs? And this was our civil society spotlight report for the EU level when the EU presented its progress report on the SDGs at the United Nations HLPF. And so this was our kind of shadow or spotlight report on that sort of civil society's take on how the EU is doing on the SDGs. I can share a few key messages from that as well. SDG Watch Europe also does a lot of work in terms of bringing together national coalitions, some of whom also produce their own spotlight reports when the various member states do their voluntary national reviews. So that's a kind of another area of our work which we like to be involved in. So maybe what I can do is just end with a kind of few sort of messages, I think, from that report. And I mean, I think I saw one of the questions in the chat was sort of like, what should the EU do basically to try to get closer to the SDGs? I mean, I think it's clear we are radically behind, you know, and I think that message I think has sunk in, because I think for some years maybe there was a sort of perception, okay, we're making our way, but no, I think there is a very good kind of baseline that we are regressing on lots of targets. I think the contention, or there's not necessarily consensus politically on how to solve that. So, I mean, we as SDG Watch Europe, we would demand, and we do demand, a more kind of structural, systemic change approach to these questions, because we have seen that the kind of business as usual model is not working and is failing many people across Europe, and even beyond Europe. And so for this, we kind of want to think about changing a bit our approach to how we do things. So these are kind of core messages that we put together. One is kind of to have an overarching strategy at EU level on SDGs, because in all the kind of 9 years that they've been a framework for sustainable development and for transformation, the EU has never kind of actually developed a single strategy on how to do that, which is quite remarkable. The second is kind of moving beyond GDP, as we know that GDP is a very ineffective way to measure kind of what actually matters for human well-being. So we would like to see more indicators on well-being. Thirdly, I think we need to reduce our European material footprint. We would call for having EU-level targets for material footprint reduction. So kind of moving to a circular economy where we maybe tax kind of resources in that sense, and pollution, and move away from sort of taxing labor income, for example. That's one idea. Then we need more redistribution of wealth. I don't want to just say tax the rich, but this is kind of maybe where it stands, and is maybe what is needed. Excess profit taxes, wealth taxes, you know, kind of making sure that those who are in trouble are not falling through the gaps, and this is incredibly important. We need to basically also improve the way we monitor the sustainable development goals, and kind of close some of the systemic gaps in the monitoring systems. Maybe we can take more, you know, other forms of data, look at how we can improve that, look at how we can truly measure where we're going wrong, and then ensure policy coherence for sustainable development. So kind of leading by example. We need to kind of make sure that the policies have coherence, you know, that kind of environmental social policies are working together. Yeah, we have to look at this kind of these narratives that are coming forward now on sort of security, on kind of competitiveness. You know, it doesn't really make sense to hugely ramp up our defense or spending on weapons and ammunition, for example, thinking about the kind of dramatic impacts that war and conflict are causing on human life, on human suffering, on the environment. So we kind of need to think about these questions very carefully, I think. So, I mean, that's a little bit from us, kind of our work. I'm happy to really take questions or hear a bit more on your thoughts. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. We do have some questions in the chat box for you. And if anyone else has any questions, please add them to the chat box. The first one is there one thing around the SDGs that people could ask MEP candidates in the run-up to the election? And what would it be?
Oh, very good, very good. I mean, I'd say the SDGs are a very holistic framework, where you'd like to think that kind of, you know, we can't really go through this framework of transformation without tackling all those areas. Coming from the EEB and from an environmental network, for me, I think, I mean, obviously, energy is a huge topic, and it's one, when we're analysing the manifestos, we realised, okay, that's one that's caught a lot of people's attention, a lot of political parties' attention. But I guess we see there are a lot of kind of false solutions already, you know, being kind of proclaimed as a sort of way to decarbonization, when actually, you know, things like carbon capture and storage, for example, or hydrogen, or to some extent nuclear, are, you know, technologies for which we don't have a kind of pathway which will really get us there in the time that we need to be there. So I would say that's probably quite a core area. Maybe others to think about is kind of SDG 2, you know, food systems. It would have been really, I mean, now we have kind of, I mean, here in Brussels, there are tractors today blocking all of the main road up to the Commission. So that's another, I think, a very hot topic, one in which we desperately need to move towards kind of sustainable food systems. We're seeing now very concerning changes to the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP. There has not been kind of democratic debate. There has not been impact assessments on this. It's been pushed through very quickly without the necessary kind of democratic scrutiny. So that is, I think, two areas where I think are quite key. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have a few more questions here. Another one is, who is the biggest champion of the SDGs at EU level, do you think?
That's a very interesting question. I feel like, I mean, all institutions have to play a role here. I mean, I think we can, sometimes civil society spend a lot of time sort of criticizing the EU Commission. I think we can commend them last year when they came forward with the voluntary review, because I think this is something that kind of raised the profile of the SDGs. At the same time, you also have the council presidencies who are often very active in bringing things, in moving things forward. Then, of course, we have the Parliament. We have the SDG Alliance in the Parliament. And the ESC itself has also been very active, and civil society as well. I don't think it gets the sort of kind of overarching, maybe political attention that it deserves. Perhaps it's not the kind of as attractive a topic as perhaps it was some years ago. But this, I think, is a bit the nature of politics, you know, and our attention spans, and kind of how long can we kind of focus on something very long term. But it's, you know, it's the only multilateral framework we have at international level for this kind of transformation. It's something that many countries have agreed to. So from that perspective, I think it's it's a great framework that we should kind of continue to use. And now we're kind of getting into an absolutely crucial period really for this, which is kind of the last 5 years. I mean, it's the last political mandate for the European Union to actually manage to move forward on these targets and goals before 2030. So that's, you know, I think if not now, when is kind of the call here from our side.
And then final question, just to wrap up, as you're talking about the fact that it's coming very close to 2030 and the end of this cycle of the SDGs, what happens after? What is the plan next?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a question that's on everyone's lips. And I think at least at the kind of multilateral level, United Nations level, this is a conversation that hasn't yet occurred. There's a big focus now on the Summit of the Future, which is coming up in September. And this, I think, is kind of one of those, you know, very large summits where they will try to sketch the path, but they are not yet kind of tackling this question. I think, I mean, this is my own personal view. There will be many who I think would want to keep the framework, maybe with some small tweaks, but I think there's a lot that we still haven't done. So I think that makes sense. I mean, why not continue? And then there's the other, which is, you know, the challenges that I think multilateralism and the UN system is kind of experiencing now. where it's not kind of the same atmosphere as we had in 2015. And so we need to think about that and think about what sort of framework could come forward. I think one of the kind of Achilles heels is the economic growth sort of angle, because we have a lot of strong scientific evidence for beyond GDP, for kind of post growth as an approach that is probably needed, and sort of how does this fit? So there are lots of things to think about with this, but nothing is yet, I think, clear.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, we'll all eagerly be watching this over the next few years and seeing, yeah, what will come out of this and what the future will be. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I will hand back over to Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was great. And thank you to all our speakers. We'll wrap up now. If you have keep an eye on Concern social media. We have a couple of events coming up in the next few weeks. On April 24th, that's a Wednesday in the evening, we have a climate slam poetry event. We also are taking part, as I mentioned, in the Coalition 2030 SDG hustings. That will be in Dublin on the 18th of April. And also on May 9th and 10th, we are doing an event that's focusing on Syria. As Barry mentioned, the anniversary of the Syrian conflict was occurred recently. So our comms team are doing an event called Voices from Syria, 13 years in the shadow of conflict. So that will be in the complex near Jervis Street. If you, again, keep an eye on our social media. If there's any other questions that you can think of that you wanted to ask Barry or indeed Jeffrey or Fariel, you can let us know. You can pop in the chat or drop us an email. And thank you very much and have a lovely day. Thank you.